All right, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for day 2 of Breakpoint. It's great to see so many of you joining today. We had close to 3,000 people joining us yesterday across the 2 stages. So we're really happy with the turnout, and hopefully we can beat that number today. My name is Praveen Umanath. I'm a lead of one of the product teams at BrowserStack, and I'm really again very excited to welcome you to day 2 of Breakpoint. So before I get started, just wanted to walk everyone through the hop-in interface. This is the platform that we're using today for the event. So just on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see 3 buttons: reception, stages, and expo. So reception is where you'll find all of the general information you need about the event. Which talks are live right now, any key announcements we're making, and also the full schedule for you to explore and add to your calendar. The second option below reception is stages. So we have 2 stages, right? And I'll walk through the schedule today a little bit later on which talks are on which stages. So you can basically switch between stages depending on which talk you're interested in attending. The third option is the expo. So expos are basically the place where you can go and visit our virtual booths. So we've set up virtual booths with solutions and product experts from BrowserStack who can help you address any questions that you have about our products. You also get a chance to win some cool Breakpoint swag. So make sure you attend those booths, visit those booths inside of our expo. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see under the stage tab, you will see two main sort of sections. One is the chat, and second is polls. So chat is obviously what you can use to ask questions. So we will be reserving about 10 to 15 minutes after every presentation for questions. So please use this to ask any questions, and we will be periodically conducting polls, which I will call to your attention throughout the day, and you can click on polls right next to chat and answer our poll questions, which typically should not take more than 10 seconds. And lastly, under the event tab, there is an option to basically see, sort of talk to all the other folks who are attending this event, right? It's a great way for us to network with sort of other leaders and engineers and developers inside of the QA community. So you can click on the event, and there is an option called People, which will allow you to find all the other attendees and network with them. And lastly, I know we got a lot of questions yesterday about the sessions, whether they're being recorded. So yes, they are being recorded. We are recording each and every session, and we will be sharing all of these through our YouTube channel in about a week after Breakpoint is over. All right, great. So with that out of the way, let me move to the agenda of the day. So first up, we have basically 2 stages, right? So we have 2 parallel sessions. First up, stage 1, which is the stage that you're in right now, we'll have a talk on contemporary exploratory testing by Maaret. And on stage 2, we will have Naomi from Amazon talking about how to leverage AI among other strategies to decide between test cases. Post that, we will have the next 2 sessions, which are again going to be in parallel. So stage 1, we'll have yours truly talking about some of the new features across the BrowserStack product portfolio. And on stage 2, we'll have Alex from Retesting talking about whole team holistic quality. Following that, we have an exclusive session on stage 1. So there are no parallel sessions for session number 5. And that's going to be a very exciting, I think, panel hosted by David Burns, who heads open source at BrowserStack. And he's going to be hosting a bunch of engineers from different companies who are all sort of key contributors to the Selenium project. So make sure you attend the Selenium panel discussion. Post that, we'll have 2 parallel sessions on stage 1 and 2, sessions 6 and 7. So Jennifer will be talking about building a testing culture at Pinterest. And we have David Jones from Percy, who's going to be talking about visual testing with Percy and how to go from 0 to hero. And lastly, but most definitely not the least, we have the last session of the day at session number 8 on stage 1. Again, there are no parallel sessions for the last session. This is going to be the last session of the day, where we will have Erica from Calendly talking about how manual testing is not dead, just the definition. So that's the agenda for the day. With that, I'd like to sort of introduce our first speaker of the day on stage one, who is going to be Maaret. She's from Vaisala, and she's going to be talking about contemporary exploratory testing. So Maaret is a exploratory tester extraordinaire with a day job at Vaisala as a principal test engineer. She is a tester, a polyglot programmer, a speaker, author, and a community facilitator. She has been awarded 2 prestigious global testing awards, the most influential agile testing professional in 2016, and the Eurostar Testing Excellence Award in 2020. And she has been also selected as one of the top 100 most influential in ICT in Finland in 2019 and 2020. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Maaret, and over to you, Maaret.
Good day, everyone. I'm not quite sure what time it is for each of you. We have quite a global audience here, so I just had a great day so far, or you have a great day ahead. We're going to be spending the next half an hour on a topic framed as contemporary exploratory testing. Contemporary, I could say also modern, or the most recent, or whatever other words you want to put in place. But basically, what I want to talk to you about is this idea that when I watch people test in my company, in the community, in the different companies that I worked with over the years, when they do exploratory testing, I can't say whether it's manual or whether it's automated. It's actually a mix of those two, in the sense that if you need to be testing, for example, for things like right now I'm testing with my team, reliability of connecting to the network and registering a new device, you probably won't be doing that manually, getting enough repetitions all alone by just running the things kind of like hands-on keyboard, but you actually create some sort of scripts that will run the tests for you over the night, and always your next day looks like analyzing whatever results you had at your hands. And kind of getting to this idea that it's not either or, it's yes and for these dual and automated tests, it kind of frames the way that we think about exploratory testing differently. So let's talk about that some more. So first of all, the word exploratory testing, I kind of wanted to start with that. It's been around for over 35 years. Originally coined by Gainer, it was the word intended to mean that in some companies, particularly in Silicon Valley 35 years ago, some people were doing testing a little different to what some other people were doing. So the popular way of doing regular testing back then was that you would create test cases, bundles, piles, huge amounts of test cases, documented, and then share them amongst various people so that you could get all the plan-driven testing done. Whereas exploratory testing kind of came as something that was kind of like a secondary, different way of getting to better results. A way that emphasized that the person doing testing needed to have the agency, so that while they were testing, they were doing some learning as well. And the learning was focused on understanding that the time we are investing into the testing we're doing is actually producing the best possible results. And the test case-based approach just wasn't cutting it. Also, the people starting with exploratory testing 35 years ago, they came with this idea or the experience that, we need to look at things not from the unit or, the code perspective alone, but testing is something that is multidisciplinary. There's some aspects of finances to it. We need to understand whatever domain our systems are created for. We need to understand architectures, we need to understand the technologies, we need to understand value, we need to understand legal aspects, we need to understand how people operate, what kind of problems they have when they're working with systems. So there's like a multidisciplinary approach into thinking of how these systems work. So when I say contemporary exploratory testing, I'm kind of calling for going back to these original ideas of what it was 35 years ago, but then saying today what we need is continuous integration, relevant tooling for simple automation creation, or architectures that support automated testing in a way that we didn't have 35 years ago, and to contemporize, to bring to the modern world this whole idea of the exploratory testing, we need to look at what the world around us is right now. So I wanted to give you an example of what this looks like if you're testing some kind of a system, just to give you like a practical idea. I've been recently teaching testing with various simple tools, and one simple tools I use to teach as a target of testing is created for testing purposes only, is this tool called EPrimer. It's created by tool tester Alan Richardson, and the idea with EPrimer is very simple test target, where basically you can put in text, you can check for the click for the button, check for EPrime, and as an end result, what you get out is number of words, number of discouraged words, and number of possible violations. Just, looking at the application, you probably have some ideas on how would you test this. You would probably put some text into that field, different kinds of texts. Maybe you would, run this with an automation tool like Selenium or any other tool that serves the similar purpose. Or maybe you would go into the code underneath it, and you would run some of your tests on the unit testing level. All of those are great ideas. That's exactly where we start from with a new application. But also, this application, just by the name of it, called EPrimer, it includes a whole domain in it. There's an idea in the English language called EPrime, basically saying that you're supposed to be able to write, when you're writing EPrime, you're supposed to be able to write whatever you want to say without using the word to be. And there's a whole Wikipedia page giving you examples, explanations of the value of this, all sorts of things that you could use in learning the domain. So this application is something that I use a lot for teaching people on how to do testing. When then testers start with this, what they usually don't get to right away is a great demo phrase. A great demo phrase is something that in a normal project you might ask if you were, not creating this tool yourself. You might ask it from someone who did create this tool and ask, like, how do I see all the great features that this system, the feature that we have created, has to offer? And a great demo phrase, you can also find it by exploring and by exploratory testing the application, and that's how this particular phrase is found. So as you can see, if I write the text to be or not to be, then this dash, Hamlet's dilemma, I get text that is colored red and blue. I get different numbers for each of the three things. And usually looking at people exploring this application in a group, it typically takes them 5, 10, 15 even minutes, sometimes even a full hour before they figure out, starting from just the application and the existing specifications, how to get all these three or the different features that this one demo is showing available in the user interface. So the blue one is not a straightforward one to figure out. What happens when people explore this, though, is that there's three different traps that I find that people get stuck in. The first trap, when they're exploring and trying to figure out how to test this, is what I call a bug trap. So when I watch people test this, that first notice that the bug count or the word count right now is 9, but there's actually only 8 words on this example sentence. The bug trap is when the tester, whoever is analyzing and designing tests, automated or manual, or making choices between those two, when they end up making those choices, they notice that they're seeing that the word can be off, and they start investigating the word count and trying to find all the different ways it could fail and to understand the bug that they're seeing with this one. And it can very easily go so that there's so many ways that the word count can fail that an hour later we actually haven't tested any of the other things, any of the other features at all, the discouraged words or the possible violations. So that's what I call a bug trap. We have sometimes the tendency in our testing, in our exploratory testing, well, to get lost into the idea that we saw something off and we'll just follow that hunch and we forget all the rest of the priorities. Another trap that we end up with this example a lot is what I call an algorithm trap. That's what I see a lot with people who have been using automation tools in a relevant way. And they see a chance of creating this general purpose algorithm that could be verifying right from the beginning whether the output that this program is giving us is exactly correct or not. So verifying the numbers, the word count, discouraged words, and the violations, that's kind of straightforward. But figuring out exactly what gets colored what way and what are the combinations there and how do we verify that they really match our expectations in the most generic way possible, it is another trap where you can spend easily a few hours on. And it might not be the hours that you want to spend. So that's why I call it a trap. So again, if you go there and you want to be there, then that's fine. But I find that we often go there by accident. The third trap that I see when people test this and explore this is what I call test cases trap. So going into reading the specification, they start creating a secondary documentation, a listing of all the things they need to go through. Or the other option is they will pick and choose things from the specification. And sometimes I even watch people fall into this trap where they take the first line of examples, then the last example. All of those work, by the way, on this application, but in between there's a whole set of things that don't work. And I've seen people even kind of like dance around not being able to track the coverage against the specification. So either going into the test cases too thorough, trap, using too much time there, or not being thorough enough and missing relevant feedback that they could be giving. So again, kind of like all of these to me are ways of using your time in a way that isn't an intentional one. And there's nothing inherently in these traps that is created by whether you test manually or whether you test with an automation tool. These traps are something where you end up if you're not careful about the use of time. And the use of time and being intentional and careful about that is kind of the core to what I call contemporary exploratory testing and what I expect good testing in the companies to look like, that we are aware of where we use our time. We're not making things by accident. We're not missing coverage by accident, but we're actually being systematic in whatever approach we have. So in order to explore this application, I've done various sessions. I've probably seen now over 100 people test this application with various kinds of ensembles, pairs, and all kinds of constellations that I can create. And sometimes to some of those groups, I'm a constraint that they absolutely have to use a test automation tool in order to explore, just to make the point that there's nothing in exploratory testing that prevents us from creating automation at the same time. Quite the contrary. So what usually then happens is I get to start with this idea of test automation is Gambit. So it's kind of like if you think in chess, the Queen's Gambit is just a way of opening the game. It's one of the many options we have. It's the Queen's Gambit. The automationist Gambit is again one of those options we have on opening our exploration. And we could open our exploration with the idea that test automation is documentation. So if we would create test automation documentation, choice of tool might vary. I've used as an example on a very basic course and to teach people who have never written any automation before, that it's quite straightforward to use. For example, robot framework, we could use Selenium with a choice of language just as well. But in this case, we've used robot framework and the browser library, which is on Playwright. So basically, first, we just kind of create a very simple, by exploring the user interface, create a very basic script where you could just, open the page, click on the buttons, input some text, and do some basic verifications. And as you can see in this basic verification, it doesn't have all the 3 numbers. It has only 2 of the 3 numbers verified. So again, the scope of how far you automate is something that is up to you when you're exploring to create that automation as documentation. So running this, you would definitely want to run it, and you'd want to see it. So that's kind of what your starting point is. You have some kind of a linear script maybe that you're able to get to pass. And then you can work from that linear script quite easily. So the next step here is basically taking the same linear text, making it something where you can take arguments in, and then kind of like just having the possibility of creating multiple different test cases, and just then kind of like, through automation, verifying that you're getting the right numbers. And this already creates you a test application, the different kinds of things that you might have otherwise, in the pre-exploratory testing world, you might have created as the regular test cases that I really don't think we should be in the modern world creating anymore. If we want that level of documentation, automation, I believe, is the right place where we should put this. So instead of having just that one test case, now we have 7 test cases. And since we have the possibility here on just playing with the browser, we can also run the very same 7 tests over the 3 different choices of browsers that this supports in both headless and headful modes. So it actually gives us perspectives over browsers over time that we could be doing if we are implementing in this way while we're exploring. So there's a definite extension benefit to the way we do our exploratory testing. Again, running this, just to show you that I left the result here on the level of there's some red. So we're actually finding bugs as per the specification here with these test cases. So when I'm expecting number 15 there, I'm actually getting number 1 back. So test number 6, many of those things on that list are actually not recognized quite correctly. And then the question on the failing test is whether you should make it pass, whether you should disable the test so that you can take it to continuous integration. But for exploratory testing purposes, you might not need to have it in your continuous integration running always green. It might be that that's not the next thing you want to spend your time on. There might be other choices, but most likely very soon after this one, you would want to take it to the continuous delivery and make sure that it's keeping you true to whatever was green previously. So the reds need to be addressed. There's multiple strategies on how you could approach that. So this kind of like how people build this in an exploratory testing fashion is, you start with a single line, you just write something, or you write some of your tests by hand, by writing by hand the script that will then execute your application. You make sure that you know that the tool works, you see it fail. You make sure you complete your first kind of like linear script maybe. You do the same thing, but you go for variables so that you can actually repeat it over and over again. You maybe do the same thing, but with templates, so not just copying with different variables, but actually using some kind of a summarized perspective of presenting your test cases. You see it failing with a bug, you decide what you will do, what's the approach for the CI system. You're turning your whole specification in this application for tests, guessing maybe the values that are also likely to fail, but the specification didn't talk about. You go over to multiple browsers, multiple builds, if you get it to run in CI. But to get it to run in CI, you would have to address what you would do with the red, because you don't want that red in your CI. So I'm just giving you this as an example that this is actually how we create our automation, but this is also how we explore. Those are not separate approaches. The only reason we keep them sometimes separate in our projects is that we are limited by the skills that we have available. We're limited by the programming skill. We're limited by the testing skill, but also we are very much limited by the collaboration skill, which is getting two people that have very different skill sets to really work as a pair at the same time together on getting this work done. So that's what limits us a lot more than the general idea. So if I don't want to keep this in CI, I might throw it away. But what happens when we do things in this way? We create this automation using the same 1 hour time, comparing different groups, is that I notice that, this test here, it missed around one problem, the one line, the test number 6, which ended up being red. But if I didn't ask people to learn a new tool within that 1 hour, and I didn't give them the automation, what they usually do is they come up with, a longer list of problems that the application has. So sometimes, as part of our choices of what constraints we use in our exploratory testing, we also make it so that we get more likely to be blind for seeing some of the problems that we would like to see. And this is the balance that we need to strike between running things through the automation interface and running things so that there's a human definitely looking at things and noticing things, and also then generating more of the different options that we could do in a quite quick and non-documented fashion. So we're much quicker in trying out various kinds of things when we're trying to document in detail. So the documentation is what is definitely causing the use of time here. So there's problems like the text box resize is completely broken. So the page, basically, if you put a longer text, it doesn't fit into there anymore, and you can't even scroll it, so you can't see the text. I broke that. It's just one line of code, and actually, instead of reporting that bug, I prefer teaching all exploratory testers on how to fix that bug, because you fix that one line CSS problem faster than you write a bug report. So it's again part of the contemporary approach to exploratory testing, aware of where you use your time. There's tool-related problems that you might find around large sets of characters. There's interesting versions with the dashes and the new lines, and on how word count can be messed up, and a lot more others, kind of like specified examples that actually are not properly recognized, categorized, and color-coded in various kinds of test samples, including the new Bible in EPrimer. It's a rich source of data that actually discovers many problems in this particular application. So again, the domain and understanding the domain is leading the quality of testing all in all. So what we did, or what we do with this one, when we use automation, we choose the constraint. And my rule is, well, of course, optimizing the time that we use, but also to never be bored when we're doing the testing. We need to understand that we have only first eyes on a new application when we are first time looking at it. So we may need to maybe make choices about the first experience so that we can carefully notice the way we feel about something new, and not bring too many things in at that time. And there's definitely options around fixing things, the type of feedback that we care for in the end of the project. We don't care usually about the small problems anymore, just as we are about to be pushing things forward. So on-time feedback also changes the options that make sense. So some of the things are no longer choices that we can make at different times of the project, early or late. And the collaboration, it's really something where your constraint is your skill, but if you have collaboration skills, it enables you to kind of remove that constraint by pairing with completely different set of skills. What I kind of hope from the constraints is not that we would be kind of making the constraint on are we automating and documenting with automation, but that we would be considering that it's not just our code that we are constrained by. So for example, I'm taking this little quote here from Naomi Wu on this idea that, you know, if Signal, we say it's secure, but the operating system that it relies on isn't, it's actually not a very good and secure system in that sense yet. And the same theme comes with pretty much any system, any piece of code that we, in a team-oriented way, start looking at. So we really need to think in terms of systems. There's whole listing on that website on various kinds of constraints approaching the same problem in different ways. So if you want to kind of like get ideas on how to practice different constraints, there's some homework for every one of you. But what I kind of want to conclude today with is this idea that when we're looking at kind of like, you know, in the non-contemporary way, exploratory testing and test automation as separate things, which I don't think they should be anymore. What the exploratory testers primarily usually say they care about is that they first want to focus on, you know, things that are always different, are likely to find new things, new problems, and kind of like get more coverage over new scenarios that we might have over the system. Whereas a lot of times I find that when I approach the problems, a test automation specialist, what I start with, what's my first thing that I'm making myself constrained on, that, you know, I can get to the different scenarios as soon as I have a way of doing just, you know, one. I want to capture some of that execution and be able to repeat exactly, and then I want to be able to programmatically vary it. And what I'm kind of saying here with contemporary exploratory testing is that you will make these choices in the moment rather than making these choices between the rows of people. And that's kind of putting the two rows together in that sense. So automation in frame of exploratory testing, it's definitely that documenting that we just looked at, but it's also extending your reach. You won't want to be up all night running the thousands and thousands of repeat tries registering to network. You want to use automation for that. But it's also alerting you when you have large masses of repetitions on where to look at, how to get to analyzing the right individual instances. And when you're creating this automation, it really forces you to understand what we're building in a detail that makes sense. So my kind of final words here, you can't automate well if you don't explore. But you also can't explore well without automating. And this is what I call contemporary exploratory testing. It's something we all do in our various roles, and we just need to figure out how do we, on a day-to-day basis, grow our understanding and skills and share the work with the entire team, because this work, all of this testing stuff, the exploratory testing stuff in particular, it is too important to be left for some people who are just specializing on this. It is something where we all are building our skills on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Maaret. Thank you for walking us through that. I think exploratory testing is something that I think we probably don't spend enough time on. I think the world is all talking about automation, but I think this is an important part of any testing organization. Great. So Maaret, I think we have a few questions. So let's try to address as many as possible. By the way, folks, there is a poll that's going to be popped up on the poll section right next to chat. So just take 10 seconds to answer that poll question. Thank you. All right. So Maaret, the first question is, how do you fit exploratory testing sessions, time-wise, right? So where do you slot that into the sprint? And also what kinds of sort of folks or users do you have taking part in these exploratory testing sessions?
So I believe there's three kinds of exploratory testing. The way that I do exploratory testing has nothing to do with sessions, so I need to clarify this a bit. There's exploratory testing as a process. It is every single thing, every piece of automation that we do. So the question that you could be asking in that sense is, how do we plan our testing and how do we make sure that we complete the testing so that output is that we've done the great testing and we have automation out of it. And that has basically, for each user story, we make a plan, we distribute the work. It's different every single user story. The second way of looking at it is the session-based idea, that you think of exploratory testing as something that you add kind of like as a sprinkle on top of the other things, which is not what I'm doing here. It's not at all what I do here. So if you want to sprinkle extra exploratory testing on top of what comes naturally, then you schedule time from calendar, you figure out who are those people that you need for those sessions. It might be you and you just take that time. But for me, it's usually these sessions, the sprinkled sessions, are usually ensemble testing. So I bring a group of people together. So it's also learning session at the same time. So then you just schedule them, but you make the recipe as part of whatever you're planning for the feature itself. And the third style of exploratory testing is you can have traditional test cases even, and you can just say that instead of doing this as quickly as I could, I can explore around it and make it bigger. So it looks like a 5-minute thing, but I'm making a decision that I'm going to use 5 hours on it, and then you explore around it. There's 3 ways of kind of like deciding on the scope, and different teams do this a little bit differently on which of the 3 they are using as kind of like the foundation of how they think of exploratory testing.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Okay. The next question is around codeless or low code sort of automation tools, right? How do you sort of what are your thoughts on using that with exploratory testing or for exploratory testing?
So again, creating some kind of automation that you can then extend if it gives you new information and it doesn't take too much of your time, and if you can even keep some of it available for later, why not? Like, I have no preference as such over which tools we use. But on the low code solutions, so far, the ones that I've used, they don't allow me to do the kind of programmatic extending beyond the basic and most simple things. So I'm still personally more for a little more code than less code.
Sure.
So the no code solutions are not my choice because I'd like to be able to kind of discover the test automation that we can use in the moment, but then make choices of what of it we throw away and what of it we keep for later. And I find that being a little bit more difficult for me in the no code solutions. It's also just not being well, I haven't maybe used the ones that could enable me there. I've used ones that get in the way of me wanting to do that.
Got it. Okay. All right. Let's keep it coming. The next question is around how do you what do you do with exploratory testing, let's say before a feature is available, right? So it's in development, and what role can or do exploratory testers play in that scenario?
So again, this depends on 2 different things, which kind of thing you have on your project. If you have a big testing in the end type of project, there is very different things you can do than if you're doing small changes continuously, which you're taking to production. So if you have what I would hope people would have, like I believe everyone should be getting to continuous delivery and more small deliveries, because the whole world of testing, kind of the contemporary expects that to happen. Then my advice is what you can do is there's not that much time between the previous feature and the next feature that you're working on. You're kind of chipping away them at the same time. So that question is like almost irrelevant on what would you do. But if you want to prepare, understanding what you have in production now and what you will have after that change, exploring the current production versus what will it look like after the change is in. It's a good use of time in my experience. And then definitely, making sure all of us in the teams understand the building in the same way, working on the acceptance criteria, clarifying whatever misunderstandings we might have, and splitting features into smaller. All of that is work that can, exploratory testers as such can participate in.
Got it. Got it. Great. All right. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So in Agile, so let's say I'm doing 2 week sprints. How do I convince management that we should incorporate exploratory testing, into our testing processes?
I don't usually end up having to convince management on exploratory testing as such. Sometimes you need to convince them in making enough space of someone's time for testing in general. And if that's the problem, and the managers don't yet understand or don't want to they want to prioritize somehow the time on the application, either through a programmatic interface or by using it in some way. If they think that's not necessary, maybe trying to frame it with more words, talking about tasks around reliability, you need to do longer term things, tasks around documentation, tasks around, automation is a great excuse to do better exploratory testing in many of the teams. But then, of course, you would be expected to leave some of that automation behind.
Sure.
To create one script, it might take us 2 weeks to create one script, and it's obvious that it's a small percentage of the testing that happened that ended up in documentation. So the time we spend on creating is important.
Got it. Great. I think, and then the last question. So, is there any book or books you would recommend to improve at web testing specifically?
Web testing.
Yeah, testing websites. Sorry, testing websites and web apps. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a book that I would recommend on websites specifically. I think Elizabeth Hendrickson's book Explore It is just a general great book that people should be reading. And the book that I hopefully eventually will finish on exploratory testing that is available on LeanPub might also give some ideas. Nice. And on web testing specifically, I think that the next course that we start working on with some pairs of people that I'm working with is on a backend and front end on web technologies. So, getting involved in that type of efforts that we're trying to do might give you some ideas, but I don't recognize a book out of the hundreds that I have read. I've read a lot, so I'm kind of like a walking library of testing books.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Maaret. Really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through your philosophy around exploratory testing, and some great questions and some great answers from you. So really, thanks a lot, and appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.